Well, I think I got most of the clicking done. Welcome back, Rabbi. Good to see you. Hope you had a great Passover celebration there.
Thanks very much. Yeah, Baruch Hashem. We had a few different nice holiday meals and things with family, and it's a beautiful time of year. I'm having spring allergies from all the flowers right now, but other than that, it's very pleasant. Um, and yeah, it's a pretty special time under normal circumstances, and I think the way historical events seem to be following the calendar this year, it makes it even more filled with a sense of potential. So yeah, Baruch Hashem, we're doing all right.
It's
Hope you
it's
guys are doing
interesting
well as
how
well.
some of
Sorry,
how
what?
it's interesting. I was saying it's interesting how some holidays and certain events. It's almost like it's written into the land. I mean, one thing or the world, not just in Israel, but one thing that sort of stuck out to me once was the the celebration for the New Year of the Trees. Uh, Tish B'Av. Did I say that right?
Uh, Sorry, Tu B'Shvat is the New Year of the Trees.
Tu
This,
Shabbat. Tu.
yeah,
Okay. So,
that's around like February.
right. So that day, the next day, somewhere in that area. So it's the New Year of the Trees. If you go out and tap maple trees, you can begin to get maple syrup because the syrup at that date,
Hmm.
next day of it, it begins to move from the roots back up the tree. It's the new year. So it's the new
Hmm.
life coming back up. I mean, it's exciting to me to see that kind of stuff that it coincides with the Bible and
Hmm.
the way God laid it out. So
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
have things quieted down somewhat in your area?
Certainly in the short term, yeah. Um, we until the ceasefire, we're getting sirens daily around where we are, kind of in between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. And it kind of rose and fell over 6 weeks or so, but definitely, you notice things. I mean, the main thing is kids going back to school and reclaiming a bit more of normal life. Um, so I think it's hard to both. It's hard to trust that it will stay that way, and also it's hard to want it to be that way if it hasn't yet resolved some of the things that it was meant to resolve. But at the same time, it's pretty nice to grab a few days of somewhat more normal existence, and try to kind of claw your way back to being on top of all the different balls that you dropped when things started getting crazy.
So this week's Parsha, um,
Mhm.
what do you have us today?
So this week's Parsha is going to be Tazria, and the one that we just read was Shmini. So I thought to talk about the two of those. So Shmini, um, it recounts the story of the dedication of the tabernacle and then the tragedy of the deaths of Nadav and Avihu, the sons of Aaron, when they bring this strange fire. Um, and then it also contains a lot of the laws of kashrut, of which animals you may eat, according to the Torah, and which animals one may not eat. And it all is kind of wrapped up with HaKadosh Baruch Hu saying to Am Yisrael, V'yitem kedoshim ki kadosh ani. You should be kadosh because I am kadosh. You should be kadosh is translated often as holy, but separate and special and distinct, set aside for a particular purpose. And it's establishing, the rules of all these. You can eat these insects, but not those, and you can eat these mammals, but not those, and all of these other rules as kind of the framework that creates that separateness. So those are the two main things that are in Parshat Shmini. Um, and then Parshat Tazria. begins with commandments that have to do with a woman giving birth and essentially rules for how long she has to wait before she can go to the temple. Like first go immerse in a mikveh in a ritual bath, but then afterwards go to the temple, and how there's a different amount of time depending on whether it's a son or whether it's a daughter. Um, and then subsequently, Tazria has a lot of rules about tzara'at, which is often mistranslated as leprosy, but it's the uh, disruption of the skin, also of garments and of walls elsewhere and other laws, but a lot of focus is given to the skin of the body and talking about all the different rules for identifying this phenomenon called sarat. So, um, and I think I had the intention maybe of just mentioning a few small miscellaneous points today, in the sense that I don't think that I have a big um, set of statements to make about one thing in any of these parashiyot, but I think there's like a few small points that it's maybe interesting to bring up. And we can jump into other topics in what I just mentioned if it sounds interesting. Um, I think one thing I was going to mention about Parshat Shmini that it's famous for is that it has in the middle of it, not in the middle of it, but it has in it the middle of the Torah, according at least to one tradition of how to count words. So, if you're looking for the middle of the Torah, you could be counting letters, you could be counting words, you could do it different ways. I think counting by words, it is said that the middle of the Torah is in Parshat Shmini, and that this center actually hinges around a repetition of a word. So it happens in the aftermath of the death of Nadav and Avihu, where you have all these sacrifices that are being brought in the dedication of the tabernacle, and then Nadav and Abihu die, and Aaron and his remaining sons, Itamar and Eleazar, still are being asked to serve. But then there's this sin offering that Aaron was supposed to eat the meat of, and he doesn't. And it says, "Wet seir hatat darash darash or darosh darash." Let's say. Sorry, there's so many extra letters here because the text is actually emphasizing this is the middle of the Torah, and I was breaking into letters. But there are these two words, darosh darash. So it's the same word, the same root, seeking, seeking or inquiring. Um, and so דרוש דרש משה והנה שרף ויקצוף על אלעזר ועל איתמר בני אהרון הנותרים לאמור, מדוע לא אכלתם את החטאת במקום הקודש, כי קודש קודשים היא, ואותה נתן לכם לשאת את ארון העדה לכפר עליהם לפני אדוני. So the whole thing is, and Moses diligently sought or inquired about the sin offering, and behold, it was burned, and he was angry with Eleazar and Itamar, the sons of Aaron, who were left alive, saying, "Why have you not eaten the sin offering in the holy place, seeing it is most holy, and God has given it to you to bear the iniquity of the congregation, to make atonement for them before the Lord?" Um, and he goes on and explains, you really should have done this. But Aaron then replies to Moshe, and Aaron says to Moses, "Behold, this day have they offered their sin offering and their burnt offering before the Lord, and such things have befallen me. And if I had eaten the sin offering today, should it have been accepted in the sight of the Lord?" And when Moses heard that, he was content. So that's the brief episode. And I think there are just a couple interesting things to say about that episode. First of all, that there's something very fitting about the fact that the center of the Torah, the fulcrum, the sort of pivot around which everything turns, is a repetition of this word that means seeking and inquiring, right? That there's some element of we have to take action, we have to find out if things are being done right, we have to understand, we have to examine the issue, and it's very emblematic of the whole Torah and its function and its purpose that you have Moshe inquiring about whether a law was being observed correctly. because he's so concerned about whether we're doing what Hashem wants of us or whether we've somehow erred. Um, and not only that, but it's also that there's a kind of a dispute in a sense, not an acrimonious one, or I mean, I guess it says Moshe is angry, but um, there's a dispute over what is correct. And there are arguments that are made where people explain themselves and they say, well, on the one hand, this, and someone else says, well, but on the other hand, that. And that even more so, what's remarkable but also very emblematic of the Torah is that Moshe hears the argument of Aaron and he doesn't say, what are you doing arguing with Moses? I'm Moses. Did you not forget that? You don't argue with Moses. You do what Moses says because Moses says what God tells you to do. That's not how this works. The way that it works, actually, the way that Hashem wants his Torah to be understood, is he gives the Torah to Moshe, and Moshe teaches the law to the people, and then the people come and they say, I have a question, or I actually think it should be done this way because my understanding of what Hashem wants, according to what you've taught me, is the following. And you can actually win the argument that way. That Moshe ultimately agrees with Aaron, right? That he was coming from a sincere place in his understanding of the priority. That he wanted the dedication of the tabernacle to be a success, but Aaron is saying, look, this isn't a normal day for me and my remaining living sons because these other two sons of mine have just died. How can we participate in this thing? And the exact detail of what Aaron is refraining from participating in, you have to go deeper into why that's the issue. But I just think that one couldn't find a better way of summing up what the Torah is about and what seeking relationship with Hashem is about. That Hashem is the authority and he is king, but he gives us this law not so we can uh, mechanically and blindly and unthinkingly perform it without examining the subtleties of, are there contradictions? Are there things that need to be uh, sussed out and sort of looked through carefully? We don't just act without thought because we know what's right and we want to show how obedient we are to the divine law. Instead, this is a thing that Hashem is teaching to the world so that we can inquire more deeply and ask questions and go to greater effort to understand his Torah, because then that helps us to understand him. And actually, I think that's even captured. There's a psalm, Psalm 14, and also actually, I think 53, which is almost the same psalm, that just begins, Adonai mishamayim hishkif al bnei adam lirot hayesh maskil doresh et Elohim. The Lord looked down from heaven upon the children of men to see if there were any who understand and seek God. It's that same verb, darash or doresh, to seek. And the point is that the psalm actually had begun with someone saying there is no God. למנצח לדוד אמר נבל בליבו אין אלוהים, השחיתו והתעיבו עלילה אין עשה טוב. To the chief musician of David, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt. They have done abominable deeds. There is none that does good. So it's in answer to that kind of attitude. The next verse is Hashem looks down from heaven to see if anyone's seeking him, right? So that it reminds very much, people come along, they say, oh, there's no God. I've proven it, or I find no evidence. I'm not compelled um, by anything around me to believe that Hashem is there. But what the Torah is about, at its center in Parshat Shmini, and also what it's clearly, being described as being about in this chapter in Psalms, is that saying, I'm waiting for God to come and show himself to me or prove himself to me, or for the world to prove to me that I should trust in God, has it backwards. We discover Hashem and we develop a relationship with Hashem when we seek him, right? He's looking down to see if anyone's seeking him. And if he sees people seeking him, then to them, he'll go and show something, and they'll find a kind of trailhead for a path that they can go down and uh, learn more and understand more. But it requires that motivation to find things out and to make sense of things and to test ideas and not take everything as given, but to begin by studying the text and then say, all right, how do I deepen my understanding and how do I get to the bottom of this? And so I think that's just one very simple point to make about the Torah that comes out of Parshat Shmini. I can stop there, and then there are other miscellanea we can get to in both of the parshiot. But I don't know if you have any additional thoughts.
No, no. This one, I guess, is kind of straightforward. Uh, I was, while you were talking, I was listening, of course, but I was also trying to uh, pull it up here. I have a sort of an old Hummus that has uh, the Parshas listed in it. What English text are we talking about? Exodus, middle of
This
Exodus?
is sorry. So we're in Leviticus. Parshat
Oh, Leviticus.
Shmini would be Leviticus
Oh, I see. About 10th chapter.
chapter.
About the 10th chapter, maybe.
Yeah, let me. Leviticus
Or
chapter
that
10. Yeah, exactly.
ninth chapter.
Yeah, chapter 10 is where Darosh Darash Moshe, this the center of the Torah appears. Um, yeah, so Parshat Shmini is Leviticus, Parshat Tazri is Leviticus, and a lot of these laws are about both how the priests and the Levites are supposed to behave in various respects. A lot of things to do with offerings in the temple, but then also you have um, things that have to do with the kind of priestliness of the nation, like all these laws that are uh, about, I don't know, not harvesting the four corners of your fields or not wearing wool and linen woven together, where a lot of these detailed restrictions that when you weave them together, they become this fabric of separateness and distinctiveness that um, gives this kind of um, priestly quality to the nation, or is meant to accomplish that. And one set of things of these laws of kashrut, of keeping kosher, of which animals you can eat and which you can't. And it's very hard, famously, to um, take the laws of keeping kosher, which are just a bit later in Parshat Shmini, after we're done with all the stories with Aaron and Nadav and Avihu. It's very hard to come up with one principle that covers all of it. So within subgroups of animals, like mammals or fish or whatever, there are simple criteria or simpler criteria, but it's hard to say, oh, I have one kind of overarching message, and that's why I can't eat a pig or an ostrich or a sea snake, or it gets very overwrought trying to fit all that together. But I think if you zoom in a bit and you look at mammals, for example, it becomes easier maybe to say what it might be that the Torah is getting at, right? Because most mammals you can't eat, but there's the actual criteria that are presented by the Torah, that it has to be a mammal that chews its cud and has split hooves. And so that rules out camels and horses, and rabbits. But it leaves you things like sheep and goats and cows. And the question is what that's really getting at. So clearly, one thing that it does is you gravitate towards herd animals, like these
Mhm.
animals that are domesticated to be handled in herds, and so it's partly maybe about the herding life, and how that relates to, getting to know Hashem. Like Moses was a shepherd, David was a shepherd. There's this sense that, Jacob was a shepherd. There's a sense of that a lot of this is like somehow the shepherding life puts you in a position where you're sort of more likely to have some of the right attitudes or experiences that maybe, connect you with Hashem. And this is something that other people have argued, that maybe it has to do with kind of the politics of the Judaic kingdom a bit, like that when you're comparing to Egypt, to Mitzrayim, um, Egypt is this kind of farming society where you have all of this water from the Nile, you can irrigate big fields, and then you can, as a result, have a lot of property that needs to be defended, and you need political stability to get all the wealth out of your property because you can't just skedaddle with your wealth and go somewhere else because it's all planted in the ground. And so then you favor a strong king who can really keep order. And then that leads to Pharaoh, and we don't like the oppression that results from that. And so shepherds, by contrast, are prized as these people who are kind of mobile, and as a result, they can kind of be cantankerous and oppose authority, and oppose God kings. And maybe that is an element of, why we want a shepherding kingdom, um, in the land of Israel, and that, you're more willing to recognize Hashem as king if you don't need an earthly king to solve all your problems for you. And you can be sort of more of a nomad. But it's interesting because ultimately we do need grain. Passover just happened. One of the things you appreciate if you live in the land of Israel is Passover is the time of the wheat harvest. There's a big field full of wheat, that's, maybe a 15-minute walk from my house, that I can watch grow over the course of the winter into the early spring. And around time of Passover, it always is like up to a point where you could actually imagine someone harvesting it, and then it starts to get gold between, Passover and Shavuot. So Passover is actually an agricultural holiday where it's like at the moment where your wheat is standing tall in the field, you should restrict how you eat bread for a while and remind yourself, not to just kind of tuck in, but first you should show restraint, and there's some gratitude that comes from that. That's not the only thing that the not eating wheat on Passover is about, but that's one of the things. But the point is that one is meant to have an agricultural society where you grow stuff in the land of Israel, but there is a kind of, we should, eat these herd animals, and we should herd them, and we should, maintain connection to that kind of life, um, because maybe there's kind of values in that promote a certain kind of attitude. Like Moshe heard the call of Hakadosh Baruch Hu when he was a shepherd, tending his flock in the wilderness, and maybe there's something to that. And the only other thing I'll add is I also think that um, the the splitting hooves thing, is kind of a anti-horse, anti-camel statement a little bit, which I think is maybe another element that's there. I mean, it's a little complicated because you never really know whether the animal that's kosher, does that mean Hashem likes that animal or he doesn't like it? Like on the one hand, if it's kosher, then it's going to get slaughtered and burned up more. And on the other hand, it's kind of acceptable, and maybe that means it's of some kind of higher quality. But horses in particular, um, they represent a different kind of thing, because you can't ride around on a sheep or ride around on a cow to the same degree. Maybe you can a bit, you could try, but horses are obviously much more enabling from a military standpoint in the ancient world. They're much more uh, able to uh, be seen as a tool that gets you from A to B. Um, Whereas, although it's true, maybe you could have an ox pull a plow, uh, there's there's something more unruly about these split-hoofed animals, and also something less serviceable about them for the kind of purposes you want to use a horse for. And so horses were much, again, with Egypt, it's the same kind of thing. It's like we're much more skeptical about in the Torah. There's this idea that the king of Israel cannot have too many horses because then he'll bring people back to Egypt to get more horses for himself. There's the idea of horses as the sort of fount of military power for ancient empires. And so that it doesn't immediately follow from that, oh, you shouldn't be able to eat horses. And it's not that you can't have a donkey or something to help you carry a load, but there still is this sense of what kind of a relationship to animals are we trying to create with these rules? And when you compare it to like Genghis Khan and the Mongols or something, where everything about their life and their world was their horses, you're not going to create that kind of society here. And it seems not totally obvious always what the animals that we surround ourselves with bring out in us, but I think there may be something to that, that part of what this is about is it's kind of trying to shape the human being by surrounding it with species of animals that bring out the best in the human being, where you have to kind of tend the flock and care for them and know them by name and help them find what they need. But at another level, you're not like riding into battle on the back of a goat or something. So, it kind of limits you in certain ways. But I'm curious if you have any thoughts to add on this one.
Well, it's always been interesting to me about the difference in what's considered kosher or the herd type animals versus those that are not, and why things like a chicken might be acceptable when you consider the diets of the kosher animals. And they're very clean. I mean, I've raised cattle, I raised goats, been around sheep and deer. Very clean animals. Most will not even eat anything like directly off of the ground. They would prefer it be up off of the ground. And generally, when they do eat directly off of the like close to the dirt, they will often get sick, and you'll have to treat them for worms and things.
Mm.
Chickens are like hogs; they'll eat anything. How's a chicken get a pass here? They will literally eat anything, you know. So how did the chicken get? How did he get through the cracks?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Yeah, I definitely think what the animal eats is something people also notice when trying to make theories out of this. Like, with larger animals, it's very clear you don't eat anything predatory.
Mhm.
Um, that the birds, even the birds that you eat, a chicken will eat a worm, but it won't eat a duck or something. So,
Well, yeah, yeah. I mean, I've raised
well, I guess
chickens.
if you cut up a duck, it might eat a duck, but I'm saying
I
like,
mean, I've caught. They will absolutely kill each other in a pen and
mm,
eat each
and
other.
then eat each other.
Yes, they
Mm,
absolutely will eat each other. They
interesting.
are very disgusting. A chicken, and I mean, hogs will absolutely eat anything as well. I mean, there's been
Yeah.
humans consumed by hogs.
Well, I think when it comes to hogs, people often observe about them that because they'll eat anything, that it's sort of like, oh, well, maybe that's what makes it an unclean animal. But then what you're presenting is the counterexample with the chicken, where um, I
Chickens
don't
will
think of
absolutely
chickens as predators on the one hand. Like they, I guess being willing to eat anything is like a slight difference from being like an eagle, where your way of surviving is to be a predator and to eat
sure. Yeah,
a
that's the eagle's
um,
job for sure. And you mentioned horses, and I've had horses as well, and they have
mm,
killed other animals. That's
Hmm.
sort like a newborn goat. I had one, the last one I had, he killed up one of my baby goats, and I was very angry, and I got rid of him, so I didn't hurt
A
him.
horse did on purpose, you're
Yes,
saying.
on purpose. It was like a
Mm.
threat to him. He considered it
Mm.
like a threat, and he was there and killed the little baby goat. So,
Mm.
yeah, so a
Okay.
horse will kill, and so will chickens and pigs and those sort
I
of
mean, with
things.
smaller animals like fish and birds, I think that um, if you go down to fish, for example, it's like fins and scales is what we care about, but fish eat fish, eat fish, eat fish, and
Yeah,
you know
yeah,
you
absolutely. Yeah.
can't keep track of that or really have a problem with it.
Yeah, it's
And
almost the
so
opposite actually in the water that
mhm,
the garbage cleaners don't eat other animals, where on
mhm,
land the garbage cleaners eat other animals.
mhm,
In the water, the garbage cleaners feed off the bottom, the catfish and the
mhm.
different things, the shrimp they feed through. But it's almost like it's exactly the opposite in water.
Yeah, so I wonder with chickens if it's kind of it comes into like because it's a bit of a lower animal than a mammal, and it, I don't know, it's not quite a fish, but it's not it doesn't need to eat other animals of its sort to survive. You know, you have less of a problem with it perhaps than like with a a cat or something. Well, I don't know. I mean, but the truth is, it's not easy to explain. And actually, with birds in particular, you just have examples of birds that are forbidden in the Torah itself. You don't have clear criteria like split hooves and chooses cud or fins and scales to say exactly which birds are okay. But then you have um, criteria in the Talmud that expand on it, where it's I think, for example, having a gizzard not being viewed as a predatory animal, but again, in the sense of an eagle, a chicken is maybe distinct, but it'll eat worms. Um, but I think it's also just kind of uh, not well, you might disagree from experience, but the sense would be that the chicken is, whatever it eats, it's kind of um, less aware of what it's eating. Like that, you think of it as an animal where it kind of goes around and kind of pecks, and it's like looking for something, and then it has like a gizzard with rocks in it, so that it can just kind of grind up whatever ends up in its mouth and like helps it to digest, a diversity of what it gets. But it's not going to like go after under, normal circumstances on a daily basis. A chicken is not always going to feel like it hasn't eaten until it's killed another chicken and eaten it. But it is, it's interesting to know that they're capable of it.
Well, they
Um,
absolutely, in my experience, especially, if they begin to, let's say, one of them, it doesn't look very healthy for some reason, or it has maybe a bug on it, and the others try to get that bug. Well, if for some reason it was to bleed, well, they'll absolutely attack it, and they'll just kill
mm,
the thing and eat it. They
wow.
don't. They're very vicious, really. A chicken is. They absolutely. If you drop an egg in anywhere around them, they will just come at you from all directions to eat that egg, shell, yolk, and all. They're
Mm,
super fast. So I always just wondered about that. How's the chicken get a pass? When all these other herd type animals, they almost have like a family thing to them, where they'll watch out for their little ones, and they won't pick on a sick one. They'll sort of guard a sick one. And
mhm.
just as a farm boy, I just noticed these things. Just the difference in
Yeah, no, it does make me wonder now. Um, I mean, they are kind of like little dinosaurs that
Yeah,
are
yeah.
very
Their
ferocious.
opportunity. I mean, I get that they're an opportunity hunter, but they also we have had some in the past that once they develop a taste for other chickens or eggs, or you can't, yeah, only choice you have is to kill them because they won't
Mm,
stop. They won't stop. And no matter how much feed you put in front of them, if they get a taste for that, that's what they want. And they'll eat every egg the other chickens lay, or any chance they get to jump and start picking on another one and get it to bleed, then they get it. I don't know if it's the taste of the blood or what exactly, but they become very vicious towards each
Hmm.
other in captivity anyway. That's just been my experience.
Interesting.
Uh, but again, like when we've raised cattle and goats and things, they're completely opposite, where they will protect any of them that's sick and stand and call to them. And if I'm trying to work with them, they're even trying to push me out of the way, trying to protect the. They don't realize I'm trying to help, but so it's just different approach by those type animals,
Hmm.
and the cleanliness of them too is it's unique. But
Yeah, it's very interesting. I guess,
and it could just be maybe we and maybe it's a thing about the names of certain animals, perhaps. We maybe the chicken slid through the cracks because of a name thing or something. I don't know, and maybe he was given the okay because he did have the gizzard, and perhaps he does regurgitate and grind up food or something.
yeah,
I don't
well,
know,
if you
but
look at the birds that we know we eat in the Torah, it's like pigeons and doves. Those are
mhm.
the ones that are mentioned in the context of temple offerings. And everything involving eating meat is uh, derived from that in the Torah context. So, such that there even needs to be an extra verse being like, oh, if you really want, you could also eat a deer, because we're not going to make sacrificial offerings out of deer, but I guess they count, but so maybe it's kind of built on, you can eat pigeons and doves. And then you look at the anatomy of pigeons and doves, and there are certain small number of species, really, of other birds where there are enough like pigeons and doves that you would um, put them into the same category. And so maybe that's how chickens make the cut. Um,
What about a turkey as far
yeah,
as
turkey's fine.
see,
Um,
that's another one that kind of gets me because a turkey, I mean, you can read in the American history, let's say, a turkey almost became the American bird instead of the bald
mhm,
eagle, but he was too much of a vulture. He'll
mhm,
absolutely eat anything. He's disgusting
mhm.
too, and
Yeah.
he'll eat other turkeys and stuff. Somebody over the chat pointed out that Hasidic Jews won't eat turkey because they seen them killing other turkeys, and I don't doubt it a bit. I've raised turkeys; they're pretty mean too. They're the same type of vulture type bird that just will
Well, it
absolutely.
is a question also because since it's a New World bird, there is a point at which there would not have been a tradition saying, I keep the Torah given by Moses at Sinai and that I learned from my fathers, and we've been eating turkey in my, family for thousands of years. That doesn't work if, 1492 is the first time that anyone keeping the Torah has a chance to meet a turkey. Um, and so,
Well, there must be
um,
some type of criteria that's universal then.
yeah, so I think that I don't know the exact history of it, but I'm sure it must have had to be decided on the basis of anatomy.
Mm.
And the possibility of chickens and turkeys not having to eat other birds, like they're not obligate carnivores, at least at the level of, eating other birds. Maybe they, need to eat worms or something, but they can, eat feed. Um, that, along with having gizzard, along with maybe one other anatomical criterion, I think, maybe puts them in the same class as doves and pigeons in some way. But it is a different kind of thing to do than um, I don't know. It's just interesting because I think it shows you the evolution of halakha, like as practical Jewish law, that uh, life just keeps on sending new things at you, and you You need to have a kind of, going back to our first conversation with Moses and Aaron, it's like a new situation arises, and it's not covered explicitly by the rules that are already there, and then the rabbis have to confer and argue and innovate, and sometimes the lines, are blurry or move over time. And it's a little bit of you'd like to think like I want to do what Hashem actually wants me to do, and it's disturbing to imagine that it's like no, he knows that the rule actually is this, but for 100 years we've been eating turkeys and we shouldn't, or something like that. Um,
But
and
Hashem builds that into the Torah as well, right? To give them that flexibility that if the elders come together, they decide this is okay
exactly, yeah.
for
So
their
there's this
generation. I
idea.
mean, it's a generational thing as
There,
well.
so the reason we don't worry about that entirely is that there's this pasuk in Dvarim in Sefer Deuteronomy, um, lo bashamayim hi, the Torah is not in heaven, and that is understood to mean like Kadosh Baruch Hu gave the Torah to Bnei Israel on earth so that we could study it, so we could seek Him through it, and we could figure out what it means. And that at some level, what that means is that whatever the term is at a given time is like whatever people are doing, that's what it is. Like you shouldn't be worrying that everything about how you're keeping it is wrong. You should say Hashem created the world so that at this moment we can be keeping the Torah this way. And it does actually evolve and change over time, but you try to prevent that to a significant degree and treat it like it's an intact tradition, and it's okay. But it is a complicated dynamic because you need both kinds of things. Like, on the one hand, um, if at this point the majority of Jews who keep kosher eat turkeys, then although I might not, at the outset, if I'd never heard of a turkey before, maybe I would have come to a different conclusion about turkeys and I would have said, oh, they don't really fit, let's not do that. Um, Now that I see everyone doing it, it's like, okay, so that's what the halacha is. That's what it's been decided. And there's a lot of weight that's given to the, people voting with their feet in the community as a whole of people trying to keep the Torah and studying it. On the other hand, sometimes you really do need to kind of revisit things and fix things. Like it's possible to um, go astray and do that for a long time. There isn't even is the idea in the Torah of bringing an offering because uh, the rabbis or the leaders of the community have led the community to do the wrong thing according to the Torah for some period of time. And there's a special offering that gets brought. That's an important concept as well because people can have traditions that last for a long time that ultimately they become outmoded by circumstance, or they even, have just been wrong for a long time. We just finished Passover. A lot of Jews don't eat chickpeas or lentils or rice on Passover, mostly
Mhm.
those from Europe, whereas those more from like North Africa or the Middle East do eat those things on Passover. They're called kitniot. And if you really delve deeply into the issue, there isn't a very firm basis for the emergence of the prohibition of eating kitniot, these legumes, in Europe. It just kind of happened at a time where people they didn't have the internet, they didn't have photography. They were, sifting through manuscripts trying to decide which grains are forbidden and, what risks there were of cross-contamination of different things. And so, but as a result, there's a lot of unnecessary restriction at a time of festival when people should be able to enjoy themselves and eat, for some people. And so some people would argue, like, all right, now that we know that it's not really an issue, maybe it shouldn't be an issue. And we should forget about it. But then this desire to keep the tradition, makes it hard to get rid of. So there is a bit of a tension, but yeah, and it's an interesting question. I guess it's like like with Moses and Aaron, we should like raise the question of whether chickens and turkeys really should be kosher and see if we can win the argument. I don't know if that'll stand up in court. Chickens are pretty popular.
Yeah, they've got a good following. Uh, uh, you mentioned about sacrifices. Just out of curiosity, I don't get you too far off topic, but I've heard various opinions on Noahides doing animal sacrifice in this
Mhm.
day and age. Even in their backyard or something.
Mhm.
Technically, we could say it's probably permitted, but should they? Is that
Well, so I think it's an interesting issue. I'd like to learn more about it, and I would want to study it before making a considered statement as
sure?
kind of real practical advice. Like this is the rule according to my understanding. So I would shrink from going that far right now. But what I would say is that according to my limited understanding of the issue, it is more permissible for Bnei Noach than for Jews to make sacrifices
Yes.
outside of the temple in Jerusalem. There even was historically a period where Jews were permitted to make sacrifices outside the temple in Jerusalem. There was something called Heter Bamot, where you get this sense, you read the Bible, people are making these burned offerings in all these other places. And before there was Jerusalem and before there was the temple it was harder to argue that there was only one place where that was appropriate. Um, so there was this, during a certain period, it was permissible to make offerings in a greater variety of places. But the halacha became that once we established the temple in Jerusalem, that the Temple Mount is the place where uh, the ritual offerings have to be performed. So you do slaughter and throw the blood on the altar and all of that there and not elsewhere. Um, but if you look at, what is a burnt offering, especially like the Korban Shlamim, where, you eat some of the meat that you're preparing, um, it's a barbecue, right? But the point is, it's like you're having a barbecue, but you want it to be a way for you to acknowledge Hashem and eat, a meal that you, so to speak, are inviting Hashem to. And uh, I, I, I don't think that I don't think I'm aware of a well-developed halakha for this because there hasn't been a lot of demand for that, obviously, until this era, where, it was very necessary to know exactly what one can and can't do and how and what should be the procedures for that. So I think it's both the case that I would assume something like sacrifice, one has to be careful about how one goes about it because of the risks of participating in something improper that becomes idolatry in some way. Uh, and so it's something that, an issue one has to treat carefully. And on the other hand, I think that again, according to comments I've heard made on this issue before, that it should be more permissible for Bnei Noach to do this in their own lands and not, have to only go to this one mountain in Jerusalem in order to bring sacrifices. So yeah, that's something I enjoy having the motivation to learn more about. Um, but commonsensically thinking about how the Torah would understand the issue, I wouldn't see why it would be a problem if done properly. Because the point is like if it's not idolatry, then we're just talking about um, uh, bringing some level of gratitude and sanctity into, a meal of grilled meat, so to speak. And if we're talking in those terms, then I think it seems like the kind of thing that could fall into the category of just, yeah, there are some things that Am Yisrael, they have a lot of extra restrictions on when and how they can do certain things, but there's a lot more freedom granted to Bnei Noach on those scores, and this could be one of them. But yeah, I'll take that back to motivation to study and learn a bit more, and maybe I can try to comment more.
I've been asked the question several times,
Mhm.
and initially it used to be my answer was no, stay away from that, just no. But over time, I've learned, yeah, there's a lot of people that say it's okay. So I sort of changed my answer to, in short, yes, you can, but I strongly suggest you seek out an Orthodox rabbi and follow his directions so that you don't
Well, yeah,
get.
I think the question would be what needs to be the same and what's different.
Mhm.
Because if we're talking about a temple sacrifice in Jerusalem, then there are issues like the suitability of the animal for sacrifice, like can it have a blemish or not, of a certain kind. So it has to be a high enough quality animal according to certain specific criteria. Um, then there's how you kill the animal. It has to have its throat cut with a knife of a certain quality. Um, and then in the temple, again, there would be the Kohen, the priest, that would have to pour the blood on the altar or throw the blood on the altar in order for it to be a korban that's being done properly. So in each of those cases, one would then have to go and study the issue and say, okay, do we have guidance from the sages about what must be the same and what must be different if this is not being done in the temple? I would assume you don't need a Kohen. Um, I would assume that you probably do still care about whether the animal has blemishes and it would need to be a kosher animal. Like that, we learned from Noach himself that there are these species of suitable animals. Um, and I would guess maybe that it still matters how you kill the animal, but
Mhm.
I don't know. Not without taking the time to see what sources there are. So that'll be a fun thing to learn more about.
Well, and also if the Jews are not permitted at this point in time to bring a sacrifice because there's not the temple. And they're told directly by the prophets to make your sacrifice a sacrifice of your prayers, do charity, take care of the widow, the orphan, and those things.
Mhm.
So shouldn't we also pass that on to the Noahide that this would be the proper sacrifice versus killing of the animal? Because really, and it could just be we could say, yeah, you possibly could do that, but nobody knows how to do it right anymore or what the real criteria is, and you should just focus on until we get clarification, focus on the good deeds and charity and the widow and the orphan and that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, I think there's no question that uh, there's a lot of example in what Jews have busied themselves with for the last 2,000 years uh, that gives one plenty to do that, like you say, can connect one to Hashem in ways that don't require an animal to be slaughtered and maybe in some ways do more good of certain kinds. And so, yeah, I think that having the right intention is another element of this. It's interesting actually the laws of sacrifice in it. A lot of people observe correctly about the Torah that it is very concerned with action. And intention matters also, but it's sort of like if you never do anything nice for someone, then it's hard to say you really love them. Like you could say, "Oh, I love you," but if I just treat you terribly, then do I really love you? That's a very Jewish question to ask about, prioritizing how you act. If you're gonna say you love someone, then make sure you're treating them well. That's the core of loving them. And similarly, it's like with many other things in the Torah that it works that way. But interestingly, with sacrifices, precisely because the only thing that makes a sacrifice is your intention, is meaning like you mean for this action to connect you to Hashem. Otherwise, you're just having a barbecue that doesn't connect you to Hashem. So then, very specific issues in intention can ruin a sacrifice. For example, there's this process called pigul, where if you think while performing the slaughter that you're planning to eat the meat after the time of restriction where you wouldn't be permitted to eat the meat, because there's like a time window after which you can eat the meat from this korban shlamim that you're doing, and then you can't save it past that point, which is related to sharing it and things like that. But the point is, if you think to yourself like, oh, I'm going to eat this on Tuesday, while you're doing it, then it's an invalid sacrifice. And so just having the thought and sort of having the improper intention at the point where the sacrifice is being performed can ruin it. And so I think insofar as that's the case, it's like you want to really be doing it right and not be doing it uh, with overly great amounts of creativity. I mean, that's another thing that relates to Parshat Shmini. Nadav and Avihu are burned up because they are overly creative in this fire they bring to Hashem that He didn't command. Right now, they're Kohanim, so they face the highest level of restriction in don't be inventive. Just, you have a set of laws that are given to you about how you have a special task to serve Hashem for the nation in this particular way. So they really, went over a line in a very big way. But they also still provide this example of HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't want our unbridled, unchecked creative impulses to be directed at serving Him in whatever it feels to us in the moment feels right, because there's something unrestrained about that and undisciplined about it. And there's, self-discipline should be at the core of Avodat Hashem, always. And judiciousness and self-control and taking the right action because it's upon reflection, it is the correct one. So I think that clearly on that score, one would want to caution against saying, let's just go invent a protocol for making sacrifices without taking good advice. But with that being said, there's plenty of good advice out there probably to get with enough study.
Yeah, they could accidentally drift right into creating a new religion very easily.
Hmm.
Creating new rules. Well, we do it this time. Or do it this way all the time. It could get into a mess. But when they ask if there is a direct prohibition of them doing, I say no. In short, no. There's no direct prohibition, but you should seek proper guidance.
Yeah, yeah, I
Well,
think that
Rabbi, I
sounds
know
good.
I know it's getting late in your neck of the woods, so I won't keep you too long. Really appreciate your time and your insights into.
Absolutely. It was very interesting as always, and I certainly appreciate your thoughts as well. As an interesting conversation about kashrut. I'll have to think about some of those issues. And with regard to Tzarat and what we talked about maybe getting into with Tazria, the second parsha, the one that's upcoming, fortunately, that topic extends into Parshat Metzora that comes afterwards. And so I don't think actually, I have to check whether this upcoming Shabbat is Tazria Metzora or whether it's just Tazria. Sometimes they are together and sometimes they're split. In any case, some of these themes run enough through the rest of Leviticus that I think we'll have an excuse to take up the same subject a bit further down the line if we want. So we can save that for next time.
Okay, well, I was looking at I've got about a 30-year-old hummus the art scroll, and it goes right into Matzorah.
Yeah, no. So
And
what I mean is that sometimes the Saturday reading, yeah, I
oh,
think
I'm sorry.
at least here in Israel, sometimes it varies between Israel and outside of Israel, because the calendar is a little different. But this Saturday will be a double parsha of Tazria and Mitzorah.
Okay, gotcha.
So they often go together, um, which is fine. But in any case, we can talk about the Mitzorah another time.
Have
It's also an
you've
interesting
not
subject.
you've not put anything lately on your blog, have you, on the Macon Shiloh website?
I haven't put up any new writing anywhere in the most recent piece was there was one that came out in Mosaic magazine that was about the book of Leviticus. Actually, I guess it actually wasn't that long ago. It came out a few weeks ago. I wrote it a while back. Like I wrote it actually for Leviticus a year ago, and then I ended up not publishing it until a few weeks ago. But I can send that one along.
Oh, okay, appreciate it. Uh, but yeah, if anyone's interested, most of the stuff is on the Macon Shiloh website, correct?
I think most of what I produce is on the Machon Shiloh YouTube channel.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks again, Rabbi. Thanks everyone for listening, and hopefully we'll see you in a couple weeks.
Thank you.
Stay
Shalom.
safe. Shalom, shalom.